the ambiguous sine law. So you might notice that the color for my pencil is different today because this is the first math video on the channel. So keep it color coded and everything. Tonight on this channel, we're going to be solving a murder, the case of the two dead individuals near a small bomb. So here's some context. Jared and Fyodor, they hate Antonio because Antonio did some pretty nefarious things. So Jared and Fyodor, they decide to devise a plan that involves a detonator and a bomb. Okay, well this can't be going anywhere good, right? So Jared and Fyodor, they lure Antonio to a bomb site, and Fyodor, with his superhuman strength, throws Antonio near the blast radius of the bomb and detonates the bomb. This results in the death of Antonio. But, unexpectedly, Fyodor also died. This doesn't make sense. Well, Fyodor was supposed to be at a safe blast radius, right? So how... Well, let's use our evidence to try and figure this out. So, Antonio's 15 kilometers away from the explosion. Okay, so we could label this 15. And Antonio is 25 kilometers away from Fyodor. So we could label this 25. And Antonio makes a 20-degree angle at Fyodor. So we can label this 20 degrees. Okay. But let's just try and solve for every side here. Because for sure, Fyodor shouldn't have died. So if the distance between here and Fyodor is safe, then he should be alive. And maybe something else happened. So let's try and solve for this length right here. Alright? Let's call this length blast radius, BR. So, first of all, to solve for that, we have to solve for another thing. We have to solve for the angle here. So how do we do that? Simple. Simply use the sine law to solve for the angle there. So first of all, we got to get the angle here to solve for the angle here. So let me scroll down a bit. Sine 20 over 15 is equal to sine, let's say explosion, because this is where the explosion is, sine E over 25. Okay. So now using some simple algebra, let me include the entire value, but around 0.57 ... is equal to the sine of E. So to find E, let's just do the inverse of sine of 0.57, sine inverse of the value, and we get that E is 34.75 degrees. Okay. So let's scroll back up. 34.75 degrees. Okay. So we know that all angles in a triangle must add up to 180. So we just do 180 minus 20 minus 34.75. And we get that the angle must be 125.25 at this vertex right here. Let's label this vertex A. Vertex A for Antonio. So 125.25 degrees. Okay, with this knowledge, we can now solve for A right here, lowercase a for the side length. So we can use the same values here, but we're solving for the side length, so 15 on top. 15 over sine 20 is equal to A over sine 125.25. And then after we get this, let's solve for A. So A is equal to 35.82 kilometers. Wait, so why did Fyodor die? Because not only does Fyodor have superhuman strength, but he also has superhuman cognition. And what Jared told Fyodor to do was to throw Antonio exactly 15 kilometers away from the bomb. To throw Antonio in such a manner that Antonio would be 15 kilometers away from the bomb. And Fyodor, he didn't mess this up. Antonio is 15 kilometers away from the bomb. Because this is 15 kilometers. But you want to know it's also 15 kilometers. If we move this arm, same length. If we move this arm this way, notice this is also 15 kilometers. And this drawing is horrible. But what this does is it creates a isosceles triangle. So this actually just created an isosceles triangle. So this is the actual range. This is where Antonio was. Antonio was 15 kilometers away from the bomb. And where the explosion actually was, the explosion was actually here. Interesting. Okay. The explosion was actually here. So how far was Fyodor from the bomb? Well, what do we know about a isosceles triangle? These angles right here, they must be the same. Now, what was the angle we calculated for this? We calculated this angle to be 34.75. So this angle here must also be 34.75 because it's an isosceles triangle. Well, so how do we get the angle here? Notice something. It's making a 180. And what do we know about angles? To solve the angle of this, if this angle here is a 180, then all we do is 180 minus this angle to solve for this angle. So 180 minus 34.75. This gives us an angle of 145.25. Okay, that's the new angle we're working with. And we know the angle of this triangle must add up to 180. So we just do 180 minus 20 minus 145.25. And we get an angle of 14.75. And let's label this variable. Let's call it D for death. So we can just do 15 over sine 20 is equal to D over sine of 14.5. And now we can just solve for D. And you're going to get that D 10.98. Let's just round this to 11. 11 kilometers. Wait, so Fyodor was 11 kilometers away from the explosion, and Antonio here was 15 kilometers away. That's like pretty similar distances. So of course Fyodor would have also died. So now we know why Fyodor died. So now I'm gonna explain to you how this murder happened. Jared wanted both Antonio and Fyodor dead. To do this, he set up a trap using the ambiguous Sine law. Jared gave Fyodor false confidence by giving him a detonator and manipulated the angle measurements. Fyodor thought he could throw Antonio 15 kilometers away from the bomb and stay 35 kilometers away himself, safely outside the blast zone. But the numbers Jared gave Fyodor were designed to create an ambiguous case. Fyodor only saw one solution, the one where he was safe. He didn't consider the second triangle, where the bomb would be only 11 kilometers away from him. The detonator, it was a decoy. The bomb was on a timer. Fyodor thought he controlled the detonation, but he didn't. So when the bomb went off, Antonio was within the blast radius as planned, but so was Fyodor. Jared got them both. And this was the mastermind plan. This case, unsolvable. The police were never able to solve it with Jared's calculations. He made it look like Fyodor was the one who murdered Antonio because he had the detonator in his hand, and that Fyodor, a bit too negligent, and died himself. That's what the cops think. But now you know the actual truth behind this case. Case closed.